Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and happy International Women's Day as well. I'm Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals, and welcome to this webinar on how do successful property managers prevent disturbances when they're off property, sponsored by NoiseAware. This is me, Paul Stevens, the host for today's session. And now we have a short video from our session sponsor, NoiseAware, so check this out.
What do property damages, angry neighbors, and sound ordinance violations have in common? They all begin with a noisy guest at your property. That could have been resolved with NoiseAware. Through quick installation and 24-hour monitoring, NoiseAware is an essential tool that monitors noise levels on your property to help protect your profits and peace of mind. NoiseAware. Rest easy.
So in terms of webinar guidelines for today, please keep your sound on mute and your camera off if you're not speaking. I'm being ably assisted by my colleagues Flor and Danny today. All of the details are in the chat, so please do paste any questions you have there as well. And a recording will be sent round to everyone after today's session. So let me introduce our speaker lineup for today, and we're going to start with Andrew from NoiseAware. Please introduce yourself and your company.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, and I'm one of the co-founders of NoiseAware. NoiseAware was the first noise monitoring system for vacation rentals, help vacation rental managers and hosts all over the world be proactive when managing the property and getting ahead of in-stay issues.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrew, and of course to NoiseAware for sponsoring this session. Next up, we have Fiona from AvantStay. Please introduce yourself, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Paul. Fiona Quinn, Vice President of Business Affairs at AvantStay. We're a venture-backed short-term rental company based out of LA, but with about 1,300 properties nationwide. Been with the company about 5 years and in the industry, obviously looking after business affairs. That's the corporate arm of the business, which includes policy, risk, and legal. So a big focus of my role is making sure that we have a sustainable vision for both the industry and the company, and partner well with regulators and with communities. So excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Delighted to have you on board, Fiona. And next we have Todd, please.
Yeah, hi. My name is Todd Butler with RealPage. I'm the Vice President and Business Leader over migo, which is the first fully plug-and-play technology and service that enables both residents and property owners to manage, monitor, and monetize flexible living activity that's most likely already taking place in the multifamily apartments across the country. Prior to the COVID downturn, my team and I were part of a group that successfully launched the first Airbnb apartment hybrid concept called Nido. And now post-COVID, through our continued partnerships with Airbnb and NoiseAware and others, we are taking that concept even farther to really change the way people live, work, and travel.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Todd. We're hoping that Serena is going to be able to join us shortly. So as soon as she's able to, we will set up an introduction for her. So to add some context to today's conversation, it's of course been a very busy year for NoiseAware, as we can see, raising $8 million in Series A funding in April, partnering with the likes of Aperto, FutureStay, AutoHost, RealPage, of course, with Todd and Breezeway. And Andrew also spoke on our 2022 Trendsetters webinar back in December. Meanwhile, with RealPage, the company partnered with Airbnb to launch its home sharing solution migo in June. And one of their partners is NoiseAware, so we'll be hearing more from Todd about that very soon. AvantStay has also been very busy in the last 12-24 months, creating its own in-house brokerage division, securing $160 million in Series B funding, and closing a $500 million PropCo funding round. So we'll be hearing more from Fiona very soon. And finally, we'll also be looking at the importance of advocacy, very important, in particular, some of the work that Rent Responsibly has been doing in the United States. So let's crack on with the conversation today. Andrew, I want to come to you first. I'm really looking at sort of what the successful vacation rental property managers and multifamily building owners that you're working with are. So from your perspective, how does noise monitoring actually save off-site short-term rental managers time and money? And is there some sort of secret sauce advice for them?
Well, I think it really starts with taking the problem seriously and knowing that it's a solvable problem with technology and without a lot of overhead. We've had a great partnership with AvantStay that I think proves that. I think Todd's program's another place where just from the ground level, the even potential of having guest disturbances issues is kind of taken off the table through our partnership. But it really is an end-to-end ethos from how you create your listings, how you disclose what you can and can't do at the property. The use of noise monitoring technology does show a pretty effective effective deterrent of folks who might not have the best intentions. And then it goes all the way through the in-stay experience with having a product like NoiseAware installed so that you can be proactive if something does happen.
And, you know, do you think that this brand ethos is something that's crucial for the whole industry to actually standardize, professionalize, if we're going to be talking about these other asset classes? And I note that you're very keen to mention that it's about proactive incident management. Yeah,
I think unfortunately everyone in probably the world is familiar with kind of the party house phenomenon, which I think is a stereotype that in the past, and we all have the opportunity now to, as we professionalize and standardize, move past that. But we still need to show our neighbors that that problem is something we've taken seriously, and we have taken active measures to mitigate. And we work with our customers all the time to reach out to their neighbors, send them letters, give them material to say like, hey, we really have taken your concerns into account as we've built our business, and we will continue to do so.
Fantastic. We'll turn to Fiona next, because Fiona, I'm really interested to get your perspective. We've seen just in those context slides about the growth of AvantStay. I believe you now offer, is it more than 1,000 premier vacation homes in 100+ cities in USA and Mexico? So some fantastic growth there. How does your company actually work to prevent noise, parties, disturbances of any kind really in your properties?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as Andrew mentioned, you have to think of it end to end. No one solution is obviously going to solve the problem. So I think starting off, obviously, guest screening. We have the fortune of having a lot of data from the past 5 years of operation to understand what are problem groups, you know, what are risk factors, being able to obviously balance that with making sure obviously there's no discrimination as part of that, but being able to highlight any potential at-risk reservations and kind of flag those. Whereas getting into the house, as Andrew mentioned, obviously we do use NoiseAware. We use other in-house monitoring. I think using NoiseAware, complementing it with occupancy monitoring software and technology, obviously with some sort of camera solution. We use Ring cameras. Being able to verify obviously is very important, whether or not there are any issues with the property. And then finally, I think, you know, we can definitely have a far reduced local presence thanks to all the wonderful technology that's available. But you still do need some local presence to obviously complement it. But rather than having people, you know, outside homes 24/7, you know, we can have a kind of small skeleton staff in each market, complemented by 24/7 security if need be, for those just, you know, again, rare but occasional bad actors, so that we can make sure we squash any of those issues right away. But from that, I said, it's definitely from guest screening to how we set prices, to how we monitor the actual activities in the home, to the security deposits to make sure people are actually invested in what they do, to kind of communications throughout the entire stay, to also just how we brand ourselves. It's definitely, and I think as you noted when you included our media previously, you know, we've raised a fund. We obviously have two key stakeholders. We have our homeowners, as any property manager does, and we have our guests. And, you know, in terms of that branding, we need to make sure that we're not branding ourselves as a party group. We're not branding, I mean, we have our homes are large homes. So obviously group travel is a big part of that. And we do attract party groups, but it's saying, no, this is a family focused company. We're looking at whether it's like high end, you know, corporate travel, corporate groups. And I mean, we've been obviously very lucky in the last few years with COVID, with more travel and leisure travel. I hate that term, but it's catching on.
I don't think you're the only one who hates that term either.
Yeah.
But it's for communities, and it's, this is what we want. We want to show that, short-term rentals are not just about party homes, it's about bringing people together. It's about relationships. It's about people. So really trying to make sure that people understand that. And whilst there might, cities might get 100 calls a week on party homes, that's generally about one home in the market and not 100 different.
Yeah.
So just using data to share that with the community and raise awareness of the professionalism of the industry, because it's just phenomenal how much it's changed in the last 5 years. And I'm sure Andrew and Todd can really attest to that. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. Would you say actually I guess different property managers have different policies when it comes to this? Are house parties, or as long as they're sort of safe, are these acceptable within AvantStay properties?
It depends on the properties. I mean, I think, as everybody on this panel will say, it depends on the market, because obviously we care about our local communities. And so in the vast majority of our markets, absolutely not, because there are neighbours, there are communities. However, we have a very select estate range of properties where these are properties on 50 acres and, there's not a neighbour for miles. And, I've been to those properties and we have events and they're generally close towards where the music festivals are or specific event areas, and they're in the middle of nowhere. And, that's fine. Like, obviously there is a demand for those sorts of properties, but in terms of being, I'm based in LA, like all of my neighbors are within 10 feet of where I am. Do I want to have 100 people over for a party? Absolutely not. So it's really making sure you have a local solution and that it's appropriate. And so we kind of tier risk based on the location, based on neighbors, based on ability for sound to travel, and do it accordingly. So we can say, hey, you want to have a bachelor party, maybe this isn't the best property for you, and that's why we do the guest screening. But hey, have you thought about going to this market? And you can do whatever you want to do, obviously within reason, legally, of course. With that. And then people really appreciate that, transparency and that two-way communication.
And we noted your, you've already referred to it as well, your new venture with Saluda Grade, creating this PropCo fund, this emerging asset class of securitization as well. How would you say you're going about trying to establish best practice with communities, trying to counter disturbances?
Yeah, that's a great point. So to my previous point, everything is about a local solution tailored towards a local community. There are definitely going to be communities where it's not appropriate for there to be no caps, no limitations on short-term rentals, and I'm very supportive of that. As mentioned, in dense urban core, we shouldn't just let anybody be able to have short-term rentals at their properties. It's bad for housing affordability. It's bad for community character. It's not the way of the future. So it does need to be limited to specific areas. And so a great example is one project, which is the first project for our fund, is a specifically zoned short-term rental community, which is an HOA with 15 specific properties very close to where the music festivals are in Coachella Valley. And that's an ideal opportunity for the city because it's taking short-term rentals away from the dense residential areas and putting it into an area where, again, there aren't neighbors. They can make a lot of money out of tax. They can make a lot of money out of tourism, but it's also high-end and kind of lends itself towards the brand of the area. And so those sorts of communities, you can't do that without additional funding. Your mom and pop, 10-person, 20 property operator can't do those sorts of things. So being able to kind of create this new asset class, create the future, again, in specific markets, obviously in different destination markets, there are different approaches, but that's what this is going to really allow us. And all of the kind of cities that we've been working with that have had really significant struggles with short-term rentals are really excited about these sorts of opportunities because it allows them to support short-term rentals, but also whilst weeding out bad actors.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Fantastic insights there. And I'll turn to you, Todd, now as well, because again, we referred in those context slides to the launch of migo, was it last June, with in partnership with Airbnb, this home sharing solution. So could you talk to us a little bit more about what migo is, what you're trying to do with it, and how you've sort of used your previous experience with Nido to fuel this?
Sure. So, right off the bat, the migo is a multifamily solution that enables this type of activity and this type of process to scale. And so we're really about three kind of core things: scalability of the product, resident affordability. Our product, unlike many others, where furnished units just take housing stock off the market. We enable residents to flexibly lease their units on platforms like Airbnb and allow them to live a little bit more affordably. And then also, of course, is the owners, the property owners' profitability. Now, I mean, as it is right now in the U.S., you've got about 65% of all Airbnb bookings that take place on the platform are currently taking place in multifamily communities completely under the radar. So that's a major issue for many reasons, but it's also quite an opportunity because it's been taking place since the origins of Airbnb and other short-term rental products. It's not something that's necessarily going to just go away at the flick of a switch. I mean, I used to work on the multifamily management side of the business for Bozzuto and other companies, and back in the early 2014, 15, 16, it was just the rule to try to quash these short-term rentals wherever you could find them and build technology to actually try to thwart it. And so this is basically an opportunity to kind of go an about face and take advantage and make sure that the owner is, participating in this activity. And so Nido was a little bit more of a proof of concept. We did that. When we did that, we owned the properties that we were going into. So it was a little bit easier to test the waters and test the systems and processes, et cetera. Now we have fully kind of expanded and revamped our business model, added a few nuts and bolts and features and partnerships that we didn't have before, really so we could create a more scalable SaaS version of this type of product where it could really fit into any property that's in the right market or in the right location around the country. That doesn't have to be, owned by anybody in particular. They can just use our product and service in their community. And so, our job at migo, if we're effective, is to normalize this activity in the industry and really, enable it through transparency, controls, risk mitigation, et cetera.
And what do you think the successful managers or owners are doing to actually allow these residents to home share effectively, and maybe how does remote problem solving fit into that as well?
Yeah. Well, first off, I mean, hopefully they're using migo. But aside from that, there are a couple fundamental items that are essential for, especially in apartment buildings, to conduct this type of activity. One of which is curb to couch access control. So a lot of people think of, smart access as a fob. Well, a fob is not exactly smart. It's just a key that would have to be transferred. So smart access, obviously, we're preference to our sister company, STRz, but there are other products out there as well that give full curb to couch access, where residents and owners can grant digital keys to third parties without necessarily getting involved in physically distributing access to the building. And so that allows for a much more controlled and monitored movement of your guest through the community. So every touch point that the guest goes through would then be registered to their device. So there's a lot more accountability than a key or a fob, et cetera. So access control being one of them. And the other one being noise monitoring. So by yours truly, Andrew, it's one of the largest complaints. Take home sharing out of the equation. One of the largest complaints in multifamily to begin with is noise. And so bring in a little bit of flexible living activity, and it makes noise monitoring that much more important. And so, that's why it was very important for us to partner with Andrew and NoiseAware to make sure that we created a process and an integration that is really effective. Then I would say the other one would be cleaning. If you are going to allow your residents to be engaging in this type of activity, you want to give them and provide them a good centralized cleaning solution. You don't want to have 55 different residents in your building home sharing with 55 different cleaners running around with mops and buckets, and a little bit more of a chaotic experience. So having kind of an offering as a service to them, to allow them to do that is also helpful. And I'll end it with controls. So when I say controls, I say stay controls. So right now with migo, at a bare minimum, there is a maximum of 180 days a year that you can home share for resident units. That prevents, one of the catastrophic things that people think of when you just turn on flexible living, which is the resident just moves out of the unit, and then next thing you know, the entire building becomes a, minimal service hotel. And that's not something that, we want. It's not something that Airbnb necessarily wants. And as Fiona mentioned, it can affect, housing stock in the market. And so by putting those stay controls in place, it assures that if the activity is taking place in the building, you're at least guaranteed that the resident is still living in the building.
Mm. And thank you very much for that, Todd. And I think that moves us on quite neatly to the next point. We're looking at the best tools when it comes to remotely monitoring and mitigating these disturbance-related issues. So, Andrew, I'll start off with you and just explain to us what, we've already heard some of these pain points, but what exactly do you cater for and provide provision against in terms of managing these pain points at NoiseAware?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we kind of empower our customers to do is just define what quiet means. Quiet is such a nebulous term that I think as Fiona said, it is a very rare instance where you get these kind of party house type guests. But the golfing buddies on the weekend being loud at 2 a.m. is more common than you think. And everyone has a desire to be quiet and respectful. They just don't know what that means in this new community. So I think fundamentally what NoiseAware has allowed our customers to do is just define what that means based off of either their own risk tolerance, whether it's off city regulations, maybe it's off of the relationship they have with their neighbor. But that's all manageable through our platform, and it's allowed our customers to kind of be the first to know if someone's kind of butting up against those limits. And then of course we've built a platform that allows just automated messages to go directly to those guests with a gentle, polite reminder that, hey, remember when you signed all those house rules? Well, you're getting really close to one of them. Please like you'd quiet down. And we see that actually 95% of the time people quiet down within less than 30 minutes without any human involvement. So it's kind of building that, not only defining the rules, but actually building the entire process to automate the resolution.
And part of that is your auto resolve product, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's, again, where we can integrate with a property management system or in Todd's case with migo, and again, automate a message to the guests where you don't need the 24-hour staff. You don't need kind of the old process where you had a security guard driving around the city, which is wildly unscalable. And it's just one more step in our kind of mission to make sure this problem just never happens again in the industry.
Yeah, and mention again your Series A funding round last year, and within that, just going back to the story as well, you were talking about how you wanted to accelerate your product innovation, something that you're already doing there, and also your market expansion. So how does this go about sort of ensuring the sustainability of this whole industry?
Well, I think the key of it is just making operations easier. I think everyone in the industry is wonderfully focused on creating the best guest experiences possible. And any tools like NoiseAware that can take off some of the operational burden of kind of the rare but disastrous outcomes and just kind of move those, reduce the risk of those. So again, more time and effort can be focused on guest experiences. Like, I think that's kind of the core to how this industry continues to grow. And it's on a great trajectory right now. I think we're all pretty excited about all the new travelers that are experiencing short-term rentals, all the new markets that are now starting to see growth in short-term rentals. So I think it's just a fantastic time for the industry, and we're, obviously thrilled to be a part of helping it grow sustainably.
Thank you, Andrew. And Todd, I mean, Andrew's there already alluded to this idea of guest experience. What are the benefits of your migo service and your partnership with Airbnb that helps to provide the best guest experience or transparency or just the ability to actually be able to deal with these disruptions?
Yeah, absolutely. And so with regard to the guest experience, I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on is making sure, because of our partnership with Airbnb, we're a little bit, from the guest perspective, we're a little bit behind the scenes. We're the ingredient brand. We're kind of like the Gore-Tex inside the jacket. You don't know that we're necessarily there, but from a guest perspective, when you're normally going to a vacation rental, it's a pretty seamless process, and the guest and the host communicate, and there's usually, kind of no issue getting in the property, et cetera. With migo, we sort of facilitate and make sure that Airbnb guest experience is unfettered by the fact that they're in an apartment building that has multiple access points and all these other things. So our job is to try to just keep that as organic as possible from the guest perspective, and our technology enables that. For residents, obviously the residents are interacting with our mobile app and basically facilitating a lot of, whether it's granting access, scheduling cleaning, et cetera. But really, the goal or the benefit for them through our partnership with Airbnb is that affordability component. I mean, residents with only a few days of home sharing per month can offset their rent by upwards of 20%, depending on the market. So that is a huge, advantage for someone who might be in a market or might be in a situation where they either want to travel and live a little bit more flexibly post-COVID, or they might just be in a situation where they could use the additional income, quite frankly. So for the property managers, the benefit of our partnership obviously is control, and also the ability to partner to earn revenue from every booked night that a resident participates in. So, the best way to think of our product from a manager's perspective is, our product is like an adapter that sits on top of Airbnb to make it work more seamlessly within the complexities of an apartment building. But in terms of integrations, for example, with our partnership with NoiseAware, and because we are integrated in such a way where we're feeding all of the real-time anonymized booking data to NoiseAware, it makes for a much more interactive and much more, let's say, calculated alert experience. So for example, the first touch point, if somebody is, kind of having a party or a get together and they're being loud, that first touch point, it's going to hit them, it's going to hit the guest, and they will be messaged and said, as Andrew said, hey, you're getting close to your limit there, you might want to quiet down. The second alert, because we're feeding Andrew the information, the second alert will actually message the host. So the host will get communicated with saying, hey, your guest is getting a little rowdy. And there's, of course, because Airbnb has that host guest communication, the resident or the owner, of depending on whose unit it is, would be able to message the guest directly and say, hey, sounds like you're, kind of two strikes here. And then, of course, the third strike would be if by the first two they're not resolved, the third one, it actually calls down to the front desk of the building. So that way, by providing that type of data to Andrew's product through an integration, it allows there to be this multiple touch point situation. But as Andrew alluded to, close to 90% of all of these issues are resolved with that first touch point. So hopefully number 2 and number 3 are very rarely used. But in a multifamily environment, it's really important to have those second and third touch points.
And you talked there about affordability, and I think 2 issues we haven't talked about yet are really about trust and accountability as well. So I'm going to jump ahead slightly and come to Fiona on this point, because Fiona, as I said, this has been a fantastic 12, 24 months. We've reported on continuously on short-term rentals as well. You've achieved your highest revenue in your history. You've raised these significant investment in funding rounds. So how do you go about continuing to ensure trust and accountability in your management, even as you're expanding into new markets, whether it's the US, Mexico, quite a geographically diverse portfolio?
I would just start by saying it's been a fantastic 24 months, but it's also been horrific at times. And I think anyone on this call who's been in the industry remembers 2020 is not the best time of the industry. It was a real emotional roller coaster. And I think that really set us up for those discussions. Particularly our focus is tier 1 destination markets. So generally not urban core. And so generally, these are markets where there are not large full-time populations, and there were full-time populations. Everybody moved to those markets during 2020, and so the number of short-term rental nuisance issues, I like to say not from our homes, from the majority not from our homes, escalated significantly during that time. I mean, people couldn't go out, people couldn't go to pubs, people couldn't go to bars, they were staying at home, and so there are a huge amount of issues in 2020 that really brought short-term rentals to the forefront of a lot of policymakers' minds. Which again created the pendulum, caused the pendulum to swing very extreme in one direction in a lot of our markets. But again, it was good to create that awareness and make people realize they need to address this. And so to your point about accountability, the first point for us is just transparency and accountability of making ourselves known. And so every market that we go into, we say, we're AvantStay, these are our properties, these are our contact, like this is my contact. When I meet the cities, counties, whoever that is, these are the things that we do to try and prevent the issues that you have. Are there specific issues that you have in your community? Obviously, depending on the community, whether it's housing affordability, whether it's trash, whether it's parking, whether it's noise, whatever the issues are, let's work together to make sure that we're targeting the right homes, that we have the right right controls in place to protect our communities, and that we continue conversations. And I think the great thing about working across a lot of different jurisdictions is you see a lot of different business models, and they all suit the local jurisdiction. So in some models, you know, there's a minimum 7-night stay, and that works to, you know, create the right sort of group. In some markets, there's no minimum stay, there's no requirement for a local contact. It's just a kind of wild, wild west free for all. And that works for some markets as well. But being able to just understand what that is, what the issue is, and also being able to say, hey guys, this is what we do in other markets, is this of interest to you, is really helpful as well, because as I said, it's actually such a new area of regulation that a lot of people don't know what they don't know, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I think every model of short-term rental regulation that there is already out there somewhere in the world. And so it's being able to understand what market is most relevant to you, what are the issues that you're seeing, and being able to implement that. So being able to share that knowledge, and I know that we're going to talk about coalitions and alliances in a second, but being able to actually have that macro perspective is so helpful. So we've found it we've been very lucky in the sense that everyone's been very hospitable once we've actually shared that information. Of course, there's always going to be some negative reactions in some markets, but again, we try and invest locally, we try and hire locally, and we try and have that kind of international focus with a local presence, and make sure we can do what we can to really give back. But as I said, generally, we found that people really appreciate it, and, you know, going, even just handing out brochures in the neighborhood saying, this is who we are, let us know if you have any problems, we can change our model, what do you need, like, let's get down and, you know, support the local farmers market, whatever else it is, like, we're here in the same way any other local business is very helpful.
Thank you for qualifying that as well. And, you know, what would you say AvantStay as well is doing to develop its tech offering, but also elevate the customer experience at the same time, because these are equally very important, and also dealing if you've got issues happening in multiple properties?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as Andrew and Todd both mentioned, the guest experience can be very much improved and also impacted by either too little or too much harassment during the experience based on whether there are potential issues. So what's the most important thing, as Andrew has mentioned, is data. And that's what using these tools provides is, again, there's always going to be a problem neighbor who sits outside with their binoculars, like watching that house like a hawk. And we've had enough, you know, like one of our worst serial complaints in the last 5 years that I've worked here was next to a residential property in San Diego. And the complaints were, you know, there were 2 children at this property, you know, they were playing at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. How dare they? It was like the ping pong was too loud. You know, they were like, it's actually insane. And so, you know, being able to verify complaints, whether it's, you know, through NoiseAware, but also using NoiseAware complementing that with Ring to say, actually, there are only 2 people at this property. There is not a giant rager happening at this property. Like being able to share that with the city on the one side so that we don't just send security over every time we get a call, and we don't send 10 text messages to every member of the group to say quieten down. That's so helpful. And then on the flip side, obviously being able to have the data when people say, hey, we're not having a party and there are 200 people at that property, being able to shut that down as well. So being able to have an appropriate response based on the actual situation, that's what in-home technology does. I think we have our own in-house engineering team who brings together all that technology. So we're very fortunate with that. And that's, as mentioned, bring together everything from guest screening, fraud identification, to in-house experience, to alerts, to our 24/7 team offshore who's able to monitor everything and ensure all our alerts are consistent and are verified. And then post-day experience, and obviously making sure that we get that feedback, which is, hey, were you over communicated to during your stay? What could we have done better? How can we kind of better support you? I think that's key as well. But as I said, number one thing is having the data to make sure that we have an appropriate response, because what we've all realized, and I'm sure Todd would say the same thing, is people, the best operations are silent operations. People don't want to be bothered during their stay. People just want to go away. Everyone works hard. Everyone wants to be able to have their vacation in peace and just spend the time that they can with the people that they love, and not have to hear from their property manager every 5 seconds, or the neighbours, or the city.
Yeah, there's so much really we can take from that, especially I think that notion of the appropriate response you refer to. So Todd, maybe we might as well come to you next as well, and your partnership with Airbnb. I'm interested to know how you think that actually ensures trust and accountability, and actually providing confidence to be able to deal with these sorts of disturbances.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do, because of the fact that we're in a multifamily building, there is sort of this expectation. Every resident that lives in that building has been screened and background checked to a certain level. It's pretty standard across the industry. And so through our partnership with Airbnb, we enforce and make sure that there's a bit of an additional level of screening that's done. So when working with Airbnb, we've enabled a kind of a forced, what they call ID verification, where a booking, in order to see any of the listings that are taking place in one of our buildings, the person who is making the booking has to be fully ID verified and gone through the standard OFAC, terrorist watch list, sex offender, all the other things that typical residents would have to go through to move into the building. So there's that accountability that the person making that booking has at least gone through some of those standard processes, and that really puts the property owner a little bit more at ease and on their back foot when it comes to saying, well, how do we have these random people in our building? They're not even background checked. Well, the fact of the matter is the person making the booking is. And so, while nothing is 100%, and the fact that someone hasn't done something in the past doesn't mean they'll do something, they won't do something in the future. So that's always going to be a concern anywhere in life. But we can do our best to mitigate the concerns that residents and property owners would have.
And I guess, rightly or wrongly, Airbnb has probably received as much negative press as a lot of short-term rental companies. We hear about these party houses, we hear about drug taking, we hear about shootings as well, some tragic incidents, although that doesn't necessarily have to just refer to Airbnb. But do you think it's sort of complicated how people view partnering with Airbnb and being able to address these concerns?
Right. Now, as we just said, there's nothing that's going to be 100%, but in the incident that something does happen, one thing that we really pride ourselves in our partnership with Airbnb on is that every booking within a multifamily building, if it's a residence unit, they're covered with over $1 million of liability protection and up to $1 million in damage protection. So, if you see a typical multifamily unit, it's hard to imagine doing over $1 million of damage to one unit. Now, granted, let's knock on wood on that, but But it's really that additional liability coverage that Airbnb is willing to flex on, especially for resident units in multifamily, that really helps mitigate any of the concerns that a property owner might have to allow this activity. Just because, like you said, when these things do occur, on whether they be few and far between, they do. And so, through our partnership with them, we're able to maximize the potential liability coverage for such activity.
Hmm.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please do, Fiona.
I think I don't envy Airbnb's position and their role in terms of balancing guest and host experience, but I do think, and I think that they're making a lot of strides in the last couple of months in particular to be a little more supportive and more proactive on party prevention. But definitely we found from 2020 to 2022 probably, the pendulum did swing a little too much in the guest direction. And as you know, Todd would obviously know, and Andrew as well, hosts have a ton of data on what is and isn't going to be a good reservation, and understandably so, Airbnb had very strict controls on what hosts could and couldn't do in terms of screening guests, in terms of canceling reservations, in terms of doing otherwise. And again, understanding the purpose is to combat discrimination, which is the most important thing in the world. However, we certainly, and this is probably controversial to say, but 99% of our guest issues are on Airbnb platform because we identify them beforehand, but we can't address them. So I think being able to give more power and autonomy to hosts, again, within reason, within a framework that still addresses all the equality and non-discrimination issues that are relevant is key, because we're at a point with the industry where there are so many professional operators that we do have the knowledge of being able to understand where the at-risk issues are, would be very helpful, because yeah, we and other platforms are much more supportive in terms of us being able to kick out guests once we see a NoiseAware that is spiking through the roof, and then we are having a 200-person party. Airbnb is much more after the fact. Again, understanding it needs to balance those needs, but it's important to be able to allow hosts to kind of do what they do best, because we've got the data.
Yeah, and I'll say, to that point, and I agree with you. In our past experience, we've had to work with Airbnb to actually we've inserted what we call the migo host, which is more of a centralized call center at our corporate office, basically for that exact reason. So we have sort of a direct red line to someone at Airbnb who sort of knows that this is a multifamily building and that there are some things that may or may not be standard. So absolutely right. I mean, I think, going directly, if there is an incident, going directly through Airbnb, sometimes the person who's responding is following kind of a strict set of guidelines, and working with Airbnb to kind of say, hey, in this multifamily environment, there might be a little bit of an additional urgency or concern. And so that's something that we've done with Airbnb, and I think Airbnb has sort of recognized that, and they've backpedaled a little bit to say we're willing to accommodate these types of situations a little bit better, just because they're aware that as they're trying to get more and more into multifamily communities, they have to have a little bit more responsiveness to the building itself.
Fantastic. Just a reminder before we move on to the next stage of the conversation, please, for the audience, please do remember to pop your questions for the panel in the chat or the Q&A section. You can do that throughout the discussion. Thank you very much, Fiona and Todd, there for those thoughts. I think that really, I suppose this is where the role of advocacy organisations and local governments and alliances really comes to the fore. So, Andrew, I'll come to you on this point, because I know that you already do quite a bit of work with advocacy organisations such as Rent Responsibly. How important is their working in conjunction with you and sort of with the backdrop of the evolving short-term rental regulations?
I think, as Fiona mentioned, there's been some areas that have seen the growth of short-term rentals and maybe not taken the best direction for the industry when kind of crafting their laws. And I think that's where the folks who are in that particular city have to share their voice. Otherwise, it gets drowned out by, unfortunately, the few very loud neighbors who may have actually very real complaints, but it's the voices showing we're bringing new economic development dollars to the town. We're bringing more tax dollars. We're bringing all this kind of investment and activity to a new town, and kind of building the whole ecosystem around that is wildly important. And I think there's, again, this trend over the last, let's call it 18 months, where that's happened all over the world and in new areas. And it's a very exciting thing, but it can be stopped just dead in its tracks by a few bad situations that aren't handled properly. And it's just vitally important that not only the industry at a high level, but also kind of at that hyper local level is able to find the hosts in their area, come together and advocate for a sustainable industry.
I know you also work with a couple of sort of city short-term rental alliances as well. How do they go about communicating these efforts and making or ensuring that neighbourhoods are these areas where there is sort of harmony with short-term rentals, if you like?
Well, a great trend I've seen with some of the local groups, even some of the new ones that have been set up lately with the help of Rent Responsibly, is just creating the first level of standardization, where it really is a self-policing mechanism to say there is a good way to do all these things. We do have screening, we do have insurance, we have NoiseAware, all of these different features as a way to say, make a statement to not only their neighbors, but to their city council to say, look, here's a method to do this without hurting anybody, without taking away any rights, taking away any tax revenue, while bringing into the conversation the neighbor's very real right to the quiet enjoyment of their own space, and be that kind of example, and then use that to guide their local city council or other city officials to a more equitable solution that balances all the needs, including those of the industry and again, the very real needs of the neighbor.
And Fiona, off the back of that as well, how are you at AvantStay trying to establish this best practice with government bodies on top of the communities themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, excuse me, coalition building and working with other industry partners is the best way of doing so. And I think, as mentioned previously, our industry is not particularly well organized. I would say it's actually particularly poorly organized, especially prior to 2020. And I think one really fantastic benefit of 2020 and us all being united by some, dare I say, unprecedented times, meant that we actually came together and realized that even though we are all very different, we're all on the same team, and we all have a vested interest in professionalizing the industry and creating a single kind of voice about where it needs to go. And so we found when initially we would just have to work one-on-one with policymakers because there wasn't a forum for bringing people together. But we were in these markets where vacation rentals had a much larger industry share than hotels, but hotels had a much larger voice and seat at the table when it came to any sort of advocacy or lobbying efforts. And so being able to provide that united voice and working with groups like Rent Responsibly, working with groups like the VRMA, working with any sort of group with a, local, state-based or national voice, and saying we actually have, a combination of professional and individual hosts, and this is the size of the industry, and to all our previous points, having the data to say this is our contribution, and we're not here to skirt and avoid the laws. We're here to help you develop reasonable ones, and we want to do the right thing, I think is key, because as we all know, it's the small proportion of bad actors who are creating all the noise for the rest of us. And being visible, when there are overly restrictive regulations introduced, we're the first ones to get out of the market, because it'll be clear that we're not being compliant, and we are 100% compliant. Whereas it's when they introduce those regulations, the bad actors will keep on operating. And to Todd's point, 65% of short-term rentals and are not run by visible large organizations. They're individual hosts who are not doing the right thing. And so we want to make sure that there is a voice for the good actors, and that we can really put forward the benefits of our industry, because they're very significant.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So we are just moving towards the final section of this webinar. So I want to get everyone's thought on these next few points, and I also want to fit in a couple of audience questions if we can. So Todd, so when we look at, I want to look at how vacation rentals, and I think you've got a great perspective on this, what they can learn from other asset classes as well in real estate. So what do you think maybe has changed the perception of short-term rentals as this valid asset class that has risen a lot, particularly since the rise of Airbnb?
Yeah, so I mean, what we're trying to do and what we believe to be the case is, especially when we think about asset classes as it relates to multifamily, you've got conventional, student, affordable, active living, all of that. Within a few years, especially with products like migo kind of starting to flood the market post-COVID, you're really going to be able to see this boiling up of flexible living communities, which will be in urban core markets. You'll have plenty of conventional multifamily apartments. But you'll eventually have maybe one or two in a market that are flexible living apartments where people actually know what that means, and people who don't want that type of activity won't go to that type, and people who are looking for a little bit more of a transient, flexible type lease and that type of freedom will then seek out a flexible living community. So the idea is that it will eventually create its own asset class within the industry.
Is there something that short-term rentals can learn themselves from other asset classes that you work with?
Yeah, I think when you look at take conventional apartments, back in 2009-10, the majority of multifamily communities were not pet friendly. That was just not the case. Very few were pet friendly, and everybody, when they, and every year they had conferences and they talk about, problems and should we or shouldn't we. The issues always came up, it's liability, noise and costs. It's, the pets are going to run around, they're going to destroy everything. It's going to, bite one of my neighbors, and just, we don't want barking dogs. And that was for years, that was the reason why apartments did not allow them. Now, fast forward to 2020, every apartment in the country is pet friendly, and with COVID, thank God. What changed during that 20-year period? Well, the technology evolved to monitor the activity. The managers created a way to, kind of create penalties for violations, et cetera, and also created a way to make money off of it. So once owners and managers found a way to create a revenue generator from pets, quickly it went away. Now every apartment in the country is pet friendly because not only did it not do all the things that they feared, it created a lot of revenue for the community. And so when I look at the way pets matured through the industry, I would take the same exact thing. You look at short-term rentals in multifamily, people are saying, not in my backyard, too much liability, too much cost, and the noise is going to kill everybody. Now, take that exact same fear curve and apply it and say, okay, if we put controls in place, we put a system in place to monitor it and put technology to assure that it's being done in a controlled way and make sure that the owner is making a lot of money from this, quickly, I think that exact same curve can be accelerated. Hopefully it doesn't take 10 years, but that same type of fear curve can be overcome. And one of the things I would say is, a lot of people look at short-term rentals, without, kind of on paper, very similar to looking at Uber on paper. I'm sure if you 20 or 30 years ago, if you brought up the idea of Uber, there's 55 reasons why that is a terrible idea, and every risk lawyer would tell you absolutely not. But the fact of the matter is, relatively few incidents happen. Now they do, everybody knows, but and it's really part of this sharing economy and this dual review process that creates this human nature of, well, if you're going to review me and I'm going to review you, and I know if I get below 4 stars, I'm automatically kicked off the platform. It sort of self-cleans the bad actors out of the platform and really leaves the remainder of people who, quite frankly, want to stay on the platform. And so it's that type of philosophy that I think, as people understand how that sharing economy philosophy works, whether it be Uber, Airbnb, et cetera, people understand that it sort of will cleanse itself and make it more of a safer community for all involved.
Thank you very much, Todd. And Andrew, on that, by extension, why is effective noise monitoring important in short-term rental and multifamily buildings, especially as you're starting to move into both communities?
Well, it's, again, kind of one of these issues that if it happens too often, or someone is, a neighbor has an issue too often, it can just slow everything down. It's, Fiona mentioned, I'm sure she's had more than one kind of repeats complainer, and luckily now with NoiseAware, you can have a report that says, look, we have noise monitoring in place because we care about your standard of living, but also we have this data to say there was nothing happening. So like, we really need you to not complain as much, only if there is actually a real problem. And where short-term rentals, I think, is both better and has some things to learn from the hotel industry is that the hotel industry has a front desk, right? Worst case scenario, I'm sure we've all experienced this in a hotel where your neighbor's loud, you can call down the front desk and there's somebody to go knock on the door. Well, interestingly, first of all, only 25% of folks in hotels actually do complain. And so most people are still just staring at the ceiling angry. But in the short-term rental world, there isn't that kind of on the ground staff that's easily available to, who do I call, who's responsible, which properties in which part of town. And so with kind of NoiseAware and our auto resolve feature, we kind of act as that kind of known presence, if you will, that if there's something going to go wrong, you're going to get a polite reminder to tone it down a little bit because it's 2 a.m, but it comes with some kind of authority or feeling like the property manager's there knocking on your doors if it wouldn't have top.
Thank you, Andrew. We've actually had a question in from our CEO here at IHM, and Fiona, I think this one might be best suited to you. We've got just about enough time, I think, to ask it. And it's, what fines do local authorities actually hand out if the property managers don't abide by noise regulations? Is there something that we're not aware of at the moment, or that you can inform us of?
What fines?
Yes, or anything like that.
So many.
I'm not at all suggesting that you don't abide by noise regulations, but I think the property manager angle would be great.
It happens. Very much differs obviously by municipality, but generally on the lowest end of the spectrum, it's $100 or $200 for noise complaints, parking, occupancy, etc. On the highest end of the spectrum, the most regulated jurisdictions that we're in, fines can start at $10,000 per noise infraction, and that is over a very small decibel level. That's one person over occupancy, with generally combined with a 2 to 3 strike rule, which is if you get 2 of those citations, then you lose your ability to short-term rent, either for a limited period of time, 6 months, or on an ongoing basis. So there's a real sliding scale in terms of the severity of, I guess, consequences for non-compliance. And that's where, to Todd and Andrew's points, if you're looking at how you can apply learnings from other asset classes in terms of how the industry is regulated, this is actually providing an opportunity for both HOAs or municipalities or states to introduce rules and regulations that they would never have even thought of before. And the reason why these sorts of I would say overly extreme measures are actually approved is it's providing more controls than what you would to have for a long-term renter. There's no way that you'd ever be able to charge someone $10,000 for having 2 people over for a dinner party for a 30-day plus rental. But being able to say, hey, we've got an occupancy, a 5-bedroom house, occupancy of 10, there's an 11th person coming for dinner, I'm going to charge them $10,000 and potentially take away their ability to rent. Like that's a no-brainer to sell to an anti-short-term rental community member. So there's the whole spectrum out there. Fantastic. But I don't advocate $10,000.
You mentioned You mentioned HOAs. We've got a question from Brandon in the chat. Now, we're going to have a 2-minute countdown at the end of this webinar. So if any of our speakers want to answer that question, please do pop your answer in the chat and we can respond to Brandon. I've got just a couple of questions to run through before we finish, but I want to send a big thank you to our contributors today, to Andrew, to Todd, and to Fiona. Have we got some slides? Yes. So we're excited that our annual Shorties Awards for the global short-term rental industry will be held in London on Wednesday, 18th of May, 2022. We're currently in the middle of an entry period and you can enter as many of the 20 categories available as you wish and are eligible for at no cost by the deadline of this Friday, the 11th of March. Very excited to be back in person, and you can find the links to book tickets and to sign up for the awards in the chat. We've also, I think we've got a video from one of our judges, also from NoiseAware, Michael Golden. So take a look at this.
NoiseAware is excited to be a part of the 3rd annual Shorties Awards, coming to you live in May in London. Be sure to get your applications in by March 11th. It's right around the corner. And I'm excited as a judge to take a look at a lot of these applications and see all of the good that you guys have been working on over the past 12 months. See you soon.
And thank you very much to Michael there from NoiseAware, who's going to be a Shorties judge very soon. We're back on Tuesday, the 5th of April for our next Rockstars webinar. That's on the new categories of flexible living. You'll be glad to know I won't be doing any contortion there, as you can see on the screen. And I would recommend signing up for that session in the chat. For sponsorship opportunities, please do contact my colleague Katie. Her details are on the screen now. A big thank you again to Andrew and the whole NoiseAware team for your support sponsoring this session. We're extremely grateful for that and look forward to working with you moving forward. We're going to keep the session open for another 2 minutes, so you can jot down any details that we've discussed in the session today. Our speakers will also hang around in the chat whilst we keep it open for another 2 minutes. Feel free to contact us via our various channels on screen now. And all that's left for me to say is a big thank you again to everyone for listening and to all of our speakers for contributing. And we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much.